speaker with us today, Jhon Center. Jhon is the director of one of the science impact centers at Center Galeska University, and his center is the Indigenous Knowledge Center for Education Science Impact. It's part of the USGS Science Impact program. And so Jhon will present what for many of us is probably a different way of looking at the world. So I won't take up any more time and let Jhon do his presentation.
I'm not? Okay. All right, well, okay, am I there?
It's a little lag between the signal light and the action current.
Okay. Well, personally, first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here. It makes me feel very good. Even when I had the invitation, I was like, wow, gee, I didn't realize what I had spoken about at Reston, Virginia already had a science impact. But no, I'm really honored, really honored. In fact, speaking with some of my colleagues about the opportunity to go to another university and present on behalf of the university honors not only me but my colleagues. So I'm really proud. Usually to try to get over a lot of my nervousness, I always look towards a foundation that I have, and I'm going to ask you if you could forgive me to say something in my own language. Mitakiepi le ampetu kile wakaya locha leo manichi leke lila opila. The chante woglaki na nampe che usapalo. Na oloanki le yoha cha anakumpo. Yeah, hey, Tukashila ahe tuwan kunke ape Elohe. Oya teke wacheng sabiao ni pina. Io tie onkumpe Elohe. Tukashila ahe tuwan na unshi ulapo. O tukashila na unchi ahe tuwan po na. What it is I'm going to talk about comes from my heart, and my heart is connected to a land base and especially my ancestry. So I do invoke the help of my ancestors, sort of acknowledge the higher power that overlooks all of us, to be here with us as we talk about some important things that come from Indian country. So those are things that we do at our college. If you can believe the things anytime we get together, we have an elder get up and pray, say something that reminds us, that connects us all together. So this meeting that we have here really is a uniting and a connection. And what I bring to you is a perspective from South Dakota, the Indian world where I come from. I know I've had many experiences out there in mainstream America, but I have traversed across the country, this North American continent, and finally come home to work at a tribal college. My talk is going to be in three parts. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about our university, and then I'm going to move into this little program about what I call Another America, reminding you, me, of what this country used to look like and how some people still see it today. And then I'm going to give a talk about our Indigenous Knowledge Center for Education and Science Impact. And we'll open up for some discussions. I was in a class this morning, and I thought it was very stimulating for me to be asked questions. So if you think of anything that you want to ask me, it not only helps you, it helps me. And I really like to be asked questions. I think I do better with questions. Also, coming to this country, I mean, I drove 3 hours to get to the airport to get over here last night. But always I remember, wherever I go, there was indigenous people that lived here. So even that song that I sang connects to the spirits of the people that used to live here. If you can believe it, every element of creation, all that embodies some sense of what I call a spirit memory. So I do know that I draw upon those grandfather spirits and grandmother spirits that are around here to know that I'm here, that I'm singing, and I want to make a connection in a good way. But those are the things that we believe in where I come from. And there it is, our logo, St. Gleshk University. We're a buffalo culture, so that's very prominent for everything we have involves the buffalo. And a vision of our university really comes from gentlemen like this this man is Chief Two Strike. St. Gleshk in itself means spotted tail, and the college is named after a visionary, Chief Spotted Tail, who was one of the treaty signers in 1868, who also had a vision of education for the future. But a man like this, we aspire to this leader who in these kind of drawings, these ledger drawings, actually embodied these kind of virtues of leadership, wisdom, okshape, hohitika, bravery, woachitanka, generosity, and wochotanganaka, fortitude. We have those emblazoned into the medicine wheel. It really points to the 4 cardinal directions in our evolution with the buffalo in itself that helped form our society. So it's men like that really had the vision, that fought hard, that we looked at them as our ultimate patriots who were fighting the federal government as we know it now, fighting for our way of life, our culture, our language, our way of life. Well, today, in a sense, we have new kinds of warriors. Our students, we look towards developing new types of leadership, looking for the wealth and the welfare of our health and welfare of our people. So strengthening the Sikanju, Lakota, Oyate through education. The Sikanju Oyate are one of 7 different types of Lakota. And the Lakota are comprised of a division of 3 different Sioux people, as we're known, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. We all speak the same language, but we're differentiated in dialect by N, Ds, and Ls. So we as the Lakota, we live on the western half of the Missouri River into the western part of South Dakota. And there are 7 of us. Myself, I'm an Oglala Lakota. I'm not Sikanju, but I have relationships there, so we're all interrelated that way, but we all speak the common language. So that's kind of a little bit of a background on the college itself that carries the embodiment of leadership and how we look to the future, but we really do aspire to these kind of values. And that's something I think you're going to see in my presentation about how it is that we go forward in looking at the future through education and honoring our ancestry, because those people really fought hard for us. So anything we do in a sense of honoring our ancestors and also looking to the future with our grandchildren. I went to a summit out in JPL last summer, and I threw this up there, and people couldn't relate to it, all the NASA people. But I said, I know NASA guys, I've always seen all your org charts. They're very laid out there. But here's our org chart. But it's really interesting. Our org chart is centered around this idea of Wolakota and our connections to the ancestral voices and the future generations. But you can see that everything is so intrinsic to one another. It's connected in many different ways. And they're all connected to this whole idea of balance and harmony. So it's our organization carries with it a strong ideal of a strive to live in peace and harmony. Wolakota. In fact, that's our word for treaty. As you know, a lot of Native Americans, as you know them today, historically were involved in treaty relationships with the federal government, and we still are. But we had no word for treaty. In fact, our word for treaty was Wolakota, to live in peace and harmony. That's the concept we thought it was. But we since learned that it was really not that. It was more like land cessions we were entering into. But you can see that, though. We do have an extensive organization at our university. In fact, we're still evolving. Sinte Gleshka University is one of 35 tribal colleges. I don't know if many of you really understand and know where all the tribal colleges are, but you can see the states where they're primarily located in. But you'll see this eastern half of the United States. There really are no tribal colleges near you. But you can see everything seems to be west of the Mississippi River. And the majority of them are into the Great Plains. And we are land-grant institutions as well. But we altogether, there are 34 of them, and then there's one right up here into Alberta, which is also, we count as well. And if you want to know exactly where they are, their names of them, here's a little website you can go to, and you can get the names and addresses of all the tribal colleges there. The tribal colleges were started about 30 years ago, 1974. There was an authority called Self-Governance and Education Assistance Act that sort of opened the door with a lot of funding for tribes to start their own tribal colleges. So this is where Sinte Gleshka got its start financially from some of the funding by that authority for education, as well as other tribal colleges. But we are one of the oldest. In fact, we are the only university. Everybody else are just refer to themselves as colleges, four-year bachelor granting institutions, and some of them are still two-year colleges, but many of them are still in evolution of as education institutions that are serving their tribal population and maybe even some of the rural communities around them. But it is quite a movement because tribal colleges are much different than mainstream education institutions. They are charged with cultural preservation, language preservation. So consequently, at our university, we're very strong in our Lakota studies. So even you today, if you want to go out and get a degree in Lakota language or Lakota studies, you can come there. And other colleges have the same kind of programs involving cultural preservation. But we also are charged with the future by educating our future leaders. And that has to do with all the tribal colleges that you see there. Much more different. They're really tied to communities. They're tied directly to the tribal membership around them. And why they evolved is because the only alternative for education, even for me when I was a young man, I was sent to a Catholic boarding school for 12 years, and that was off the reservation. And I had to go to college, and I went to University of Colorado. So I was like sent away. So these colleges sort of provide that alternative for people to stay at home and be comfortable, because the success rates for most Native people at mainstream universities has always been disastrous. They just, it's really hard to leave home sometimes, leave your friends and family. So that's why the college movement is what it is today. I want to kind of move on into another topic. I was asked last spring to do a presentation to the South Dakota State, they call it the Space Grant Consortium. And so I rose to the occasion. I said, what am I going to tell people about what we're doing at our university? So I brought about some of my collective experiences, and what I'm charged with doing at the university is putting together a curriculum. But it also brought to me something I wanted to share with everybody else about what I call another America, and its concepts of the Aboriginal worldview and regional landscapes. This particular map is going to take you back to a certain time, what I call the pre-contact cultural areas. This kind of supersedes anything that you guys know as your American history, because really Native people, we still see this whole mass of land, and in fact, a lot of the Native cultures still refer to it as Turtle Island. But you can see that it's kind of geographically divided up into I call resource areas. All these different geographical areas embody the resources that have developed the culture. In the Great Plains, I know a lot about that because I'm a Lakota and we followed the buffalo herds. And we had an evolution that in our own histories have seen us take us through a migration, emerging out of the Black Hills of South Dakota, traversing through this part down into the Carolinas and eventually back up into Minnesota, and most recently in the past 200 years make our emergence back onto the Great Plains. Now that's our history. A lot of these other ones I look towards, like the Northwest Coast. Cultures evolved there because they're very rich in the resources from along the ocean. So they've evolved to be salmon and cedar people. And they really evolved as a culture. If you've ever seen their houses, their carvings, their totem poles, very rich culture. So every geographical area has evolved, geographical area evolved a culture. And I was telling these little kids at the Space Grants Consortium, I said, over here, they're like the Woodlands Indians. You know, their culture. I said, over here in Massachusetts, I said, I heard this story about how the native people there, being Woodlands people, they're sort of like agriculturists. They grew squash and beans and corn. And I said, any of you ever hear of Boston baked beans? Well, that's a native food. They actually harvested the beans that they grew and utilized the sap from the maple trees and made syrup and baked that in the ground in these clay urns, and that's how they invented the Boston baked beans. But you know, also all the food sources, everything that they can think of, the medicinal plants, all those things came from their geographical area. So we see that land bases like that as something that the earth, the mother in itself, gave to us and where we emerged from. So we have all these cultural areas. And I've seen other maps that divided us into linguistic groups, but really we see all these things as the things that helped us grow and be a people and really develop our language and concepts and spirituality come from these geographical areas that had all these resources. But I guess you can see superimposed on that all of a sudden these state lines and jurisdictional boundaries. And so we're kind of moving into an area of, I think, two worlds starting to collide. But I really want to help you with the concept about, you know, what I want to get into about our center about traditional knowledge. So this is kind of information that helps you understand what really traditional knowledge is. But also this map I just shown you right up here in the interior of British Columbia is called the Gitxsan Aboriginal people. And they were entering into what I call the land claims because they never ever had a treaty in British Columbia. Even today, there's still no treaty there yet. But they had to articulate their worldview and how they could establish Aboriginal title to this land that they've always lived on. And I thought this was very interesting, and it really said something to me about who we are as Native people. These are all clan houses. All these different little polygons here are family groups that live together, that they live on the land. So each family clan knew enough about that whole area, about all the plants, all the animals, all the things that they subsisted with. They knew about that. So this story on how they had to describe their Aboriginal territory was internal. And it came out to some kind of a boundary. So I thought that's very interesting as opposed to other people defining an area and chopping it up and saying that's it. This one came from inside out. So all this knowledge was sort of expressed through understanding the migration patterns of animals, their critical habitat, and their traditions and culture. And it was eventually bounded by a big, giant watershed. All these had watersheds within them. But this one here is heights of land and a gigantic watershed that really defined their traditional territory. So I thought that was very interesting, that even today, Native people who are entering into treaties with federal government and land claims have the wherewithal and the connections to tell this story And what's interesting is this was all done in GIS, Geographic Information Systems. To me, and fortunately, in my travels and the things I was able to participate in, this too was one of the most innovative applications I've ever been part of in utilizing technology that has a vision, that has a purpose, that has a long-reaching effect for a culture that it can survive from here till forever. You know, so I thought that to be a very powerful example of traditional knowledge today in understanding how that applies to the future. Here again, this area here is, here's Washington State, Idaho, and Montana. And there again, you can see the 49th parallel, the Canadian border. Today, even as Native people, we refer to that boundary as the medicine line. You know, it's just a kind of this fact. It's we don't understand it. We know it's there, but you know, what's the big deal? But there used to be there's a.
Where you can import drugs.
Yeah, there. or get out of the draft or something like that. This magical line. That's what it is. That's why we called it the medicine line. But there again, cultures have existed within this whole area here, and just so happen all these jurisdictional boundaries are here. But then the Coeur Nation still had, you know, they had an affiliation to this whole land base here, all the way along the sort of the Canadian Rockies inside there, and yet they have cultural areas that they still identify with, you know. So they have identified their Aboriginal territory, as you can see, by all these little camp settlements and all that they still relate to and all that. But there again, the only land claim that they can make stops right there at the international boundary. So we're still encumbered by a lot of these things, but we still hold alive this idea of an area that we are connected to ancestrally.
John, on that point, one of the things we do in the BLM community-based ecosystem stewardship courses, we talk, one of the instructors there talks about human geographic units and these cultural units as opposed to political boundaries. And they've done an analysis of this because just exactly as you're explaining, people are tied together by these cultural units. And I don't know, interestingly, a couple of years ago we were doing a training at McLaughlin, Nevada. McLaughlin is a casino town. I hadn't realized that. Thought it was going out to the desert, getting away from that. But the people that were coming to the training were right across, 10 minutes away, across the river in Bullhead City, Arizona, across the Colorado River. And we expected 40, 45 people at the training. They, for some reason, held it in this casino. We got 8, and we had to cancel the training. The Colorado, at that point, happened to be one of these cultural boundaries that we had mapped. So we don't know if that was the prohibitor or what was the prohibitor. We suspect had we held it in a schoolhouse or a firehouse in Bullhead City, we would have gotten a full complement of people. But I think there's, my own view, a lot of power for this concept.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, in fact, they seem to be more inclusive. I think they broaden it. So that was in Canada. Some of the stories that I was just going to, some of the things I kind of personally know of, but all, so I came back to Canada. This was probably about 10 years ago when I was up there working in the land claims, and I came back to talk to other Native professionals, and this whole idea of Aboriginal territory wasn't as strong here in the U.S. because of the paternalization of federal government. But this is a recent one that came out in about the last 3 years. The Coeur dAlene tribe on their website, they have a GIS program there, have actually identified their Aboriginal territory. So that's kind of a concept that's coming back again to Native people, is a reconnection to a land base beyond their little reservation. Like you can see, this is all that they really have right now through their treaty process and land cessions. But they still have a connection to all these cultural sites. And then they there's some arbitrary lines here, but you could see all these things are probably pretty much bounded by some kind of a natural feature that really identifies their Aboriginal territory. So you can see, so I always felt this as a renaissance that's happening with Native culture and how technology is becoming part of that renaissance. And they are starting to kick out cartographic products like that to identify their Aboriginal territory. Those are very sovereign statements in itself. This is another example what I was involved in with the Squamish Nation, and their headquarters is in North Vancouver, BC. So what I'm going to show you here is their idea of the Aboriginal territory that they identified. And they went about it a little bit different. They actually substantiated by the archaeological record, by a lot of the external research that they did beyond just themselves. So they utilized some of the mainstream information, ethnographic and historic research, and they also substantiated with their oral traditions. So as a result, they submitted a map for the treaty process that identifies an area of occupancy within the natural boundaries of heights, lands, and watersheds. So it's a big, gigantic watershed there, and that's the Fraser River, where they subsisted culturally with all the salmon, so they knew all the streams and all those things. So they really brought about a strong story when they involved all that. Nobody could dispute the archaeological record and all that. But interesting enough to the land claims in Canada is back in 1999 was the Delgamuukw decision, which really sort of validate this idea of oral tradition and traditional knowledge. That it overturned a lower court decision in British Columbia to say is that traditional knowledge, oral histories, and tradition are part of the claim for Aboriginal title to the land. So that really validates. And there's nothing like that significant in the U.S. that has validated traditional knowledge other than a Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. That's just a crack in the door for people in the U.S. that validates their traditional knowledge. But I will say for the USGS to invite Sinte Gleshkia to be part of this science impact with this, sort of the door is open to really explore and understand the relevancies of traditional knowledge. I think that's very innovative, far-reaching. People are going to benefit from that. We're going to benefit. And I think what we have and how we're learning to articulate that's going to really benefit society. I'm really looking forward to that. But those are just ideas. So it gives you this idea of what I call another America, how people really still see the land and relate to it. And when they have to really identify it and articulate it, this is what you see. You just see these irregular looking polygons that are part of what we call natural law. Yes, today, I don't know if anybody really ever studies these kind of maps, but you know, I look at them occasionally and I shake my head and realize that, you know, our culture was a buffalo culture. We traversed the Great Plains, but this is our reality. And this is the reality today as it is right now in Indian country. You don't see that many reservations over here in the east, but so recent history is kind of in front of you right now for where Indian people live, what we have. We're even thrown into places where there's reservations within reservations. You can imagine the conflict and culture there. Two different language groups, two different customs, and yet they're forced to live side by side. And all those things are mandated by federal policies and treaties. So that's just an idea of the jurisdictional boundaries of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, their different regions, and how they manage us.
I saw that purple in Oklahoma.
Okay, well, you know, maybe that's it. You know, when I look at these maps, that's a reality. And you look at Oklahoma for what it is. There's not that many reservations, but there's so many different tribes there. If you can imagine all the assimilation policies imposed on Native people, Oklahoma is a shining example. They moved Seminoles there. They moved Delaware people there. They just moved a lot of tribes from the east and Cherokee here. That was Indian country. They set aside to move all the Indians too. So right now there's this conglomeration of different tribes that live there on little settlements. They do have allotments. And I think they're like little county seats that really govern them, but they don't really have any reservation lands, collective land holdings like the other tribes who are negotiated with the federal government. These guys were forced marched out of their different land areas. So it's kind of a melting pot of Indian culture in Oklahoma.
Mention one thing about the East and that story. In upstate New York, when they're trying to resolve land claims, you have a split. You have people who stayed on the land in upstate New York, who are one tribe, and you have people from that same tribe who got moved out to Oklahoma. when the negotiation is going on between the tribe and the state about what's going to happen, you've got this group out in Oklahoma who say, well, we should be part of that negotiation. This is our tribe. We may live out here, but we're part of that. And their attitude actually turned out to be quite different from a lot of the others. They were more willing to negotiate for money rather than land because they're already moved. But there was a real internal conflict caused by that forced migration.
Same way with the Choctaw. They were moved out to Oklahoma, but a band stayed here. And eventually, through persistence, became very wealthy. So I don't know if you've heard of them, but that's Chief Phil Martin and his group down there. Very wealthy Native people through gaming. But yeah, you just see, you know, that is that's a phenomena here in the U.S. Most people don't really realize all those assimilation policies imposed on the Native Americans, and so. But what is happening anyway? In reality, a lot of these tribes are connecting culturally, and there's just this greening of America, I guess you could say, through Native culture, because we see the richness in our own cultures to share it with one another. So there's many intermarriages. Here's another reality about America in itself too, what Native people understand. Sometimes when I put this map up in front of Native people, they get very angry. But then I turn that anger around and say, well, you know, why don't you define your own tribal, your Aboriginal homeland? Because this was done for you. It was adjudicated, judicially established Indian land areas. The government actually had to come up with their own document to show the land areas that they actually bought or appropriated from Native people. So it stands out to be this document in the sense that says who the sellers of the land were. Well, and they were given up until 1978, the tribal people, to put in claims of any kind of against the land that was taken from them, a land claim. So they had up until 1978 to make a claim, but since then the Land Claims Commission has been closed. My concern where I come from is this big western, this is all Sioux, but it's the western half of where the Missouri River is. But you can see all these different land areas. And there are some legal ramifications to identifying these things, because they're actually georeferencing people so they can make claims in repatriating artifacts and humans back out of museums. So this map really plays an important part in Native people making claims in repatriation, because it tells them a geographical area where they came from if an artifact was found from there. So, but that's one of the applications I developed for using GIS, you know, is actually referring back to this map. So this has been a very helpful map, but it makes Native people sort of angry to realize that someone else identified their Aboriginal areas. But there again, that's for you to see that and go ahead and re-identify it again. Here's an interesting one, the Pawnee. Their Aboriginal territory, see all these arbitrary straight lines, and it's nowhere like that. If you listen to a Pawnee tell about their Aboriginal territory, a good friend of mine, Walter Echohawk, he said, our Aboriginal territory was defined by these 4 stars. Wherever you can go in this land, and if you still seen those 4 stars, you knew that you're in your homeland. Once you didn't see that star, you knew you were in trouble. You might have been in Lakota territory, he said. But no, we have different ways of identifying where we live, you know, and I thought that was interesting, because the Pawnee, they still have a star map that they relate to. You know, so there are this connection to identify people to the land, but also to the heavens, and I'm going to get into that about some of our traditional knowledge. This is my part of the world, Lakota country, the Great Sioux Reservation. And at one time, the Treaty of 1868 identified this whole area as Lakota country. But there again, all of a sudden you see these arbitrary lines. And to me, that identifies a clash in cultures when you start seeing geographic products like that. And we still contend that this treaty goes up to the eastern bank of the Missouri River. And that's ours, the Missouri River, according to this treaty. So we're still fighting that with the federal government and the definitions and terminology of our treaties. So this boundary shifts and changes all the time. So this is another thing I talk to students about why we need to use technologies to understand the dynamics of that river. Because it's part of our treaty, it's part of our relationship with the federal government. But also you can see all the legislative actions that happened. And this is eventually what we ended up with, the yellow here, these reservations. But all that land was eventually taken away from us, although it was negotiated in the first treaty. This is more the reality about some of the things that are related to land and tribal government in our existence today. Is this General Allotment Act, and I'm going to show you another graphic regarding that, but it's where we never had the concept of individual land ownership. We believed that we were part of the land, and we didn't even believe we owned the land. But then all of a sudden, we're being forced into owning land. So what they did was what reservation was left, they had this General Allotment Act. It's called the Howard Wheeler Act. It actually gave head of households and adults of a certain age 160 acres. Interesting. We weren't that many people then, but think of all the land that was left over. They opened it up to homesteading. So that's how we lost a lot of our land. That was one example here, how we lost land. And a lot of people don't realize that in 1924, they finally decided that we weren't second-class citizens and we got the right to vote. You know, what does that tell you in your history? You know, those are things that we know in our history, is that we weren't citizens of this great country until then. And then we had the Reorganization Act that imposed a form of government on us in 1934. So today we still exist in chaos with a form of government that's really traditionally not ours. I think the founding thing that keeps us together is our traditions and customs, but we have an administrative government that deals with federal government at that level. So we're talking about, you know, I guess we say conflict resolution, but we're trying to merge these two forms of government together. And very often you find people that are culturally founded to be councilmen, so that happens on many different occasions. But this Reorganization Act has a stipulation that would, you know, in the Constitution of our tribe says we can only have elections every 2 years. So you can imagine the turnover in our government. So it's just major chaos. But a lot of tribes right now are revising their constitutions to react towards, you know, being more, I guess, proactive in their future. There's all these other acts here that really affect us that you don't really understand and know, but then these preservation acts, environmental policies, they really involve what they call Native American consultation. It's sort of like the trust responsibility of federal government to really seek and look for input from Native people. So I think those are the things that we're talking about here in this policy, environmental policy place, is how to create some kind of synergy for people to sit at a table and talk. Right now, you know, that isn't so prevalent in Indian country. A lot of times we have to go somewhere. No one ever comes to us, you know, so we got to find a happy medium there. And I don't like the word conflict resolution, but there seems to be that stands in the way. You know, but we are, by law, supposed to be consulted. Like I mentioned, 1975, the Education Assistance Act, 30 years ago. Actually, that was the Nixon administration. Native people didn't mind that Nixon and his administration got more of the funding directly to us rather through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. At that time, the statistics were 30 cents out of every dollar finally got to the tribal agency because of the administrivia. But now we got more funding coming to our tribal government directly, and the Education Assistance Act allowed us to start moving into the tribal college movement. And here's another kicker that most people don't know, is been our reality, is that how this country was founded on religious freedom. But fortunately, we weren't guaranteed our religious freedom as Native Americans until 1978. And that was one of the first things that the Native American Rights Fund really fought for, was our religious freedom. In fact, right now, there are still fights going on right now regarding the Native American Church and the use of peyote as a sacrament. So we're still fighting for our rights regarding religious freedom. But you can see all these different kind of acts that sort of have us in having to be more proactive. So I think at the tribal college, I mean, where I'm involved in, I see tribal government is so reactive because they have so many priorities that there again, the tribal college has to prepare a whole cadre of new leaders to react to these kind of authorities, so we can still uphold our end of the treaties that we still have in place. You can't believe we're very faithful to those treaties. These things are things that really keep our relationship going. And if it weren't for these kind of authorities and our treaties, I really wonder what would happen to Native people. Because at one time we were administered through the Department of War. You know, and that's our reality. A joke I always tell was, you heard of General Custer. Technically at that time the Native people were being administered under the under the Department of War. So he was technically the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And he said, don't do anything till I get back. Of course, he never got back. He never made it back from the Little Bighorn. That Allotment Act and the Homestead Acts, all those legislative actions that were in violation of our treaties, but still today we can't really fuss about that, but we're left with the reality of, if you could look at the index here, there's allotted lands are in the blue, and tribal reserve lands here in the green, tribal other lands in the light green. And this used to be our whole reservation, but then through the Homestead Act, we lost. And this is all we have today on the Rosebud Sioux Reservation. You can see that here in the scale of South Dakota. That whole area that we lost is down to this, but this is our reality. This is what we have to use and manage.
About how many square miles?
Okay, I'll say about 100. There's about 400 square miles there, approximately, yeah. But that's our realities and how checkerboard that is. But our culture is really tied to this land base, not only here, that's today, but we're also connected to the Black Hills of South Dakota, western South Dakota, this whole area like that, where we still, a lot of those authorities I mentioned have us connected to there. So it wasn't for those authorities like the Archaeological Resource Protection Act and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, the Clean Air Act, all these kind of things keep us connected to that whole greater Aboriginal territory. Here's some pictures of our reservation. Now I just took that a few days ago. That's how beautiful it is. We had a nice spring, so this is the Little White River. It's running pretty full. And the grasslands, the grass is nice and tall. Over here you can see the topology. We have some of the badlands, and we have the prairies, and there's deer standing out there. But it's a really beautiful area. You know, it's our homeland, but yet it's almost like an island. And the sad thing about it is that a lot of people fall into that political boundary, and they don't realize what's happening out here in the greater world. There again, that's why the tribal colleges, for who we are, really are trying to make those connections for our students in the future. Aboriginal homeland is really one of those things that we're trying to bring back as a concept. Looking at the vested interest in the whole area, how that can really benefit us and be what you call metaphorically in our homeland, to be connected to it again, but also be co-managers, because we have that opportunity in front of us through our treaties to be co-managers of federal lands. Because we still have land claims. You know, we're trying to regain title to the Black Hills, but we know in reality we won't. But we do want to propose that we can be co-managers of federal land. That may be more of the reality. So those are things that tribal colleges are really, at least we are, and other Lakota tribal colleges are looking at. Okay, let me move into another next topic. How are we doing on time? Okay, good. Indigenous Knowledge Center for Education and Science Impact. You know, I was wrangling with how to put the words together for a title, and what came out of there was the acronyms IKCE. And all of a sudden when that stood out to me, it was a Lakota word. And it said Ikche. Ikche means it's a value that we have which is tied to the commonality of man and self. We're all common men. We're all common women. A sense of humility about who we are, but collectively there's power in our knowledge that we share. It's a distributed wealth of knowledge between common people, our experiences that we bring together. So when that word came out, it just really hit me that really that's the essence of our Science Impact Center, is a collective knowledge of who we are as a people. So I was like really inspired, and I think we're on to something good. I was telling some of my other colleagues, and I even ran that by some of the tribal historian, and they just grinned and smiled. They said, it must be good then. But I just thought it very inspirational that we were able to put together a concept for the Science Impact program and how we can actually connect to it culturally as well. And it ties in some of our values and our ideals. And really kind of thought hard about some kind of a logo that we wanted to present with our center. And I remember many years ago I drew this up, and it finally came out. It's like, oh, yeah, this is who we are as Native people, because we really sort of, we're not so much male-dominated. We're actually a matrilineal society, but then we live in harmony and balance. We complement one another. That's traditionally how we existed as a culture, in gender balance. So even that alone says something about how we want to approach our business and look at our center, is to really honor and have gender balance and look at the world in the sense of balance again too. So that in itself is a statement and a story about who we are and what our center can be. I mentioned the fact that we have many partners. We're probably the only tribal college, as of I'd say 2 years ago, that were very enterprising to go out and start developing relationships. And since then, we have written many grants. We have applied for different things and funding. But some of the things that we have in place right now is by that enterprising and outreach, and it was more or less predicated on this relationship with the Eros Data Center and the USGS. So we have a formal MOU with the USGS that we're able to leverage. And also we're part of an organization here called the Upper Midwest Aerospace Consortium, and that's led by Dr. George Seelstad. And I don't know if you know him, but if anybody I could say that as an elder in American society, that's George Seelstad is one of them. He's sort of a visionary, I'd say, but he really embodies a lot of wisdom. And we always figured him a smart man to invite us into his consortium. So, but yeah, so we have gained from our association with him, and also we several times, I don't know how many times we've been trying, and we finally cracked the nut in NASA and got awarded a Reason Can project. So we just initiated that here at the beginning of the fiscal year. It took us a year to finally negotiate our budget with them, because they shaved our budget 80%, but nonetheless, we have won one of their Reason Can projects. And we have ongoing a water quality project with NOAA, and we're getting into some renewable energy projects with them, looking at, and this has led us to, I don't have a graphic up here, but NOAA is kind of introduced us to NCAR. So we're getting involved there with NCAR and with Bob Harris. He's been very helpful. The National Science Foundation, before I started Science Impact here, I was managing an NSF project called Partners for Innovation, which involved two industry leaders, EarthSat and GST over in Maryland, and looking at developing an enterprise as well as a curriculum for geospatial technologies. And so that's all I was doing for the past 2 years, was developing a geospatial curriculum based on tradition and culture. It was very interesting because really, you know, our approach to technology through this new innovation was what I call growing technology from the bottom up rather than the top down, where the land base and the culture was really the substance for developing the introductions to GIS, GPS, and looking at this through a flowering tree, which all the branches were all the different applications and the systems approach to it and all the programming. So, you know, it followed sort of this natural trunk of the tree to flower out like that. So that was our approach to growing it from the bottom up based on the Lakota paradigm philosophy. So the National Science Foundation has really been, you know, a supporter of us, and because they've been supporting curriculum since the 90s about developing GIS curriculum, but they funded one more, a cultural approach. So I was really glad that they were inspired by our proposal. But yeah, we have just, you know, developed significant relationships with other entities here. But I want to, and I showed this slide in Reston because it, you know, maybe other people in the USGS didn't realize what USGS was really doing with Sinte Gleschke University. But I heard buzzwords at Science Impact talking about better business practices. Well, we entered into what we call a new way of doing business. Well, I'll say it's new because it's all centered around Woolakota. And when we had a formal signing of our MOU with the USGS, we actually performed what we call a Woolakota ceremony. We invoked the higher powers and actually had a religious, you know, spiritual ceremony coinciding with the signing of this MOU with the USGS. And that really validated our own processes. And it says to us as our university, well, we have finally found a mechanism to really utilize our culture and our spirituality and our new way of what we call better business practices. So this really helps us uphold our end of the bargain regarding our MOU with the USGS. And I think that sort of impacted Chip Groton himself when he came out with all the different leaders, you know, from the USGS. All the different regional directors came there as well. So I think we did get into Science Impact in a way that, you know, kind of showed us that and showed them that we have a mechanism doing better business. So that really said something to the community too that was there to see this ceremony, to see that our traditions and culture are all going to be involved in this whole idea of Woolakota and a treaty with the United States Geological Survey. Our MOU is up again. We're looking at the next 5 years. And I think, you know, Science Impacts is going to be part of our MOU and relationship with the USGS. So, but that's what it is, relationship building. And I think that's the key word to all these things about conflict, coming to some sense of solution. It's all regarding knowing each other. I had a kind of an elder friend describe to me the idea that we all sit down at the table, and he said, just imagine that there's this big colored beach ball in front of you. We're all sitting around it. Each one will argue and tell you, well, I see a red stripe, and this is what it is. It's a red stripe, and this guy will. They all go around and tell you what color they see and advocate that that's what this is. It's green. But collectively, we all hold together what that ball really is. It's multi-striped. That's what it is. But we're so opinionated to see what's in front of us. And I always thought that, you know, so the things that I've heard from the eldership in our reservation with how they talk and relate things, I know there are solutions. So this is why this new way of doing business invites that whole level of expertise to be part of this process. People that have common sense. To me, that's what I was asked this morning in class, what is traditional knowledge? And so I was given examples, but really it is. It's just common sense sometimes based on experiential knowledge, that somehow rolls on into being wisdom. Well, our science center is sort of like this blending, looking at new tools and the traditional knowledge. I always present this graphic to some of the students at the college, having them look at their ancestors and their attributes, because our attributes are adaptability. We look at the natural world and how we have to adapt to it. So we don't look at ourselves as sort of, well, let's say climate change. We have to adapt to climate and all that all the time. So we find ourselves involved in really looking at ourselves and our adaptive strategies. And these are exemplified by that man is riding a horse. And of course, we all know historically the Spanish brought over the horses. But somehow it's been written that the Plains Indian became the best light cavalry in the whole world. Because I think they recognized the power of that animal and they developed a relationship with it. They didn't think of him as a beast of burden. They actually honored him, they venerated him, they gave him names, they decorated him with feathers, give him more honors as well. And so they brought him in as a relative. So that's the way we have to look at technology, is to look at it for what it can bring to us. And if we don't like it, we won't use it. But if we do, we need to embrace it into ourselves culturally. So that's how we embrace the horse. And the horse has caused us to gather more, to travel further, and our arts really flourished. We had more time to decorate our utilitarian objects. Everything flourished with that relationship, with that animal. And then that gentleman is holding a rifle. That came to us in a way that we didn't understand. It was shown to us as a weapon that killed us, but also when we were able to secure it, we became deadly with it ourselves, because although we didn't manufacture the gun, we didn't manufacture the weapon, the bullets. Somehow we became enterprisers and were able to use that to our advantage. So those are the things that we have to look at, is how we adapt things, bring it into our culture, make it beneficial. So that's one thing I'm looking at is more of these kind of stories and examples for our youth to get inspired by their attributes of their ancestors. So this traditional knowledge thing is going to be a key to somewhat of a foundation that we don't realize that we're standing on. And we do need to know exactly where we're standing all the time. I'm going to sit down here and just kind of go through these, because these are pretty laborious, but just, if you can just read them, and I guess maybe you can look at them more carefully when it's online, but these are some of the principles of our Indigenous Knowledge and Knowledge Center. It's to integrate the traditional knowledge into the scientific assessment of land management practices. And that's one thing we want to really accomplish, is the fact that we're operating under regimes and policies that aren't ours in managing our reservation lands, and even wanted to, and how can we be involved with our vested interest into our Aboriginal territories, is to look at different alternatives and how can our traditional knowledge be part of that. And we want to really understand what happened to us. So we want to make determinations how the changes in the ecosystem have influenced the Lakota way of life. I was given an example today about a young Lakota girl that I met at a grocery store. She was a checkout clerk, and I was buying a squash because I was going to go home and cook. And she asked me, she said, "What is this? What is this?" She says, "A vegetable or fruit?" I said, "Oh my God. I didn't realize it. Here's a young Indian lady that probably doesn't know her food sources." And those are the kind of things we want to understand. Why is it that we have youth that right now that don't understand that things grow and come from the earth? Oh my God.
We have about 10 minutes, and if we're going to have any chance for people to
Okay.
ask questions, I'd love to rescue those last few minutes. if we
Okay,
can.
let's do that. Okay, well, like I said, there's a lot of things I have here, but I want to get to this idea, what we're already starting to look at as far as our science impact project. So you can read all these. I guess this is going to be online, and this is kind of just, you know, reasons and more reasons and major points. But I want to get to this. I use this imagery because it really sort of says more of the greater pictures. This is the Black Hills of South Dakota. Up here is the north end. But all of a sudden, a lot of people really connect to imagery like that because all of a sudden there's not all these state boundary lines and all those kind of things that really encumber us and sort of limit us to imagine what is possible. So we see that, and when I show this to the Lakota people, and that's their sacred Black Hills, they just like, they really love it. So technology has its place in Lakota culture now, seeing that we can see our homeland and Mother Earth in this vein. Now this is what I wanted to show you. This is really, it brought an awareness to me, and it was almost scary to a point that back in 1890, there was a man named Amos Badhartbull. He drew this map of the Black Hills of South Dakota, and it's in one of his books, the collective of all his ledger drawings. But how detailed it was for all the rivers and all the geographical places there that were significant. And then here comes another native guy, Jhon Harrington, the astronaut, 2002. We asked him to take a picture of the Black Hills. So we had that image. And when I put this image beside the other one, I was amazed to see the scale. Here's a man that's never been in space, but he was able to draw in detail the same and almost in scale. This is what, like 800 miles in space, looking down. And this man, he had the same image. He drew the red racetrack around there, which if you really look closely, you'll see this whole red ring around there, which is the soil that, so when the Black Hills emerged like that, there's all this red soil around it. And we have a local story about this racetrack here. So to me, that was very powerful about people that really walked the land, that knew the land. They lived their data. We're able to draw things like this, but today we have ways of looking down on it, but we don't have ways of walking that land to really understand that there. So there's a disconnection here that I see that, you know, as we approach the future, we have to look at these tools that are available to us, but also get back to this place where we walk the land, we understand it, and we can feel it and see it. So this man, he knew that land intimately and was able to draw it much at the same scale as what we see in an image from space. To me, that's very inspirational. And here's a constellation in the sky. As we know it, it's called the Chungleshka Wakan. But all this constellation and this stars point to geographical features in the Black Hills of South Dakota. So that's something that we really, that are timed with the seasons. And certain activities have to happen for us culturally, and we go out and do pilgrimages with these sacred sites. So there's our connection from the land to the stars. So that image from space said something to our people about the stars and how we're connected to them. And I think even science is telling us that we're all stardust. We Lakotas knew that already. But anyway, here's the last image I want to show you. Is that same map that identified these cultural features here and the names of them in our language. The racetrack around here. Over here is Devil's Tower. It's called the Bears Lodge, the Slim Buttes, all these things like that. But that's sort of the things that we wanted to bring out in our traditional knowledge about our region and how we're connected to the stars and can reference all those things. So we have this integrated approach to looking at our region. Well, that's kind of it. Any questions? Yes?
As an outsider with very little knowledge of what you've been describing, what I read in the newspapers is the importance of economic change. Not technology, not science, but business. And I have the impression that has transformed many reservations. particularly in terms of what they have to offer, which is centers for gambling.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of money that brings in must diffuse. I mean, somehow or other, your very interesting presentation didn't refer at all to the economic interest, and that's it, and that impact. So I wonder if you could just say something.
Okay, well, our university probably is really, of all the universities I know, are very steeped in the culture, which is this concept of 7 generations. It's a very long perspective, and the foundations of that are in the culture. Yes, we are charged with economic development. We're looking at a land base and how can we develop the intellect that we have there to look at making our land more productive. You know, I think all these things that you're hearing are very short term in terms of, you know, the culture in itself. We really focus at the culture and where we've been and where we're going. You know, so the culture foundation is something that we're always trying to administer. All these other things like that, I think, you know, are the opportunities for our students. We don't really look at gaming right now. I think that's more like short term. It's not so much long term. But we are looking at alternatives for our land use. We're not next to any kind of big urban area like, you know, a city where we could really thrive with gaming. Our wealth is our spirituality and our culture. So we look more towards, let's say, the restoration of buffalo, the restoration of the prairie ecosystem, things that really matter, the things that I guess most people discount as far and they take for granted, you know. But we do know that the buffalo are the heart and soul of us in our emergence from the land. Only reason I carry this message is because there are other people that have sort of inspired me to give me this reality about natural law and who we are and where we came from. But that is a very serious question about economic sustainability, you know, and the only thing we have is our land and people.
I had a question about the data collection and if you could speak a little bit more about the process of whether it's students that are involved in the data collection or the community in terms of determining what information would be useful and if that would be played out in terms of GIS.
You heard me mention growing the technology from the bottom up. You know, in fact, we want to meet community needs because the administrative government will not. They have they're self-serving, it seems to be, but they don't really meet the community needs. So we're looking at empowering the communities through students. And myself looking at the emerging technologies that are what's state-of-the-art, what we call the mobile workforce today, people out with data collection devices being right there on the land, because all these people, you know, they live on the land, they live out in the country. You remember me, I mentioned there's no street addresses on the reservation. There are little hamlets and towns and communities, but there's so many applications, but just no one department, no one person can do it. So we're looking to people that are actually living out there to empower them with. So we are having training classes with these handheld GPS units and these iPACs for drop-down menus for, you know, collecting data.
Are there specific pieces of information that the community has identified as useful in terms of being able to help the community make decisions about land use or
One of them is housing. It's a big application because there's not enough housing, you know. So and then that it relates to public safety and health-related issues and things like that. So data is really critical, and so we have to really utilize what I call the human capital, which is probably our youth, because they're really growing. There's a lot more youth than anything. So yeah, this is kind of a K through 12 kind of a thing too that we're involved in at the university. It's not just, you know, the college student, the high school student. We're also involved through the teachers because we are an education institution. We're working with in-service and pre-service for teachers regarding the technology and what it's going to take to empower community. So I think that's sort of circumventing the paternalism that we've been operating under so far, you know, with the federal government. is to be more proactive.
One of the arguments about new technology is that it should allow for new networks to form and for people to be working collaboratively in ways that were difficult when they were seriously divided by space. Does the coming of new technology change the way decisions are being made in council or in conjunction with other tribes as you think about the management of larger resources? Do you actually see any evidence of dialogue happening that wouldn't happen absent the technology, or of decisions being made in a different way?
Okay, well, we do have a consortium, an American Indian Higher Education Consortium, and with that, I know we've taken some initiatives in their support to actually form our own tribal college geographic information technology consortium called Native View. So we're starting to find those kind of synergies of like-minded people. And of course, at the higher levels like tribal presidents, tribal government presidents, they have organizations. And we've been able, just in small instances, get on their agenda and talk to them about the enabling, empowering technologies. But we're at that level where we have a form of leadership that is very fearful of losing power. So we kind of contend with that, the power brokers. and that's a reality, that.
One of the things that I know Herman and I are hoping is that students here are engaged in what we call practicums all the time, in which they take a problem in the world at large, they make that problem the focus of the class, and they're trying to provide service at the same time as they're trying to learn how to use certain tools and analytic techniques. And if there were an opportunity to link up with a group of students at your university and take an actual problem, not just in the university, but in the community at large, it's conceivable we could do some kind of joint practicum where people would bring the knowledge and skills they have here, travel out, spend some time, learn something about the place, and then continue to work with a group of students or a client group of tribal leaders or people working on a particular problem, whether the management of a natural resource or imagining the design or redesign of some new application of technology. So one of the long-term goals we have within the larger USGS collaborative is to see if we can't make practical connections that allow courses to stream into these same relationships that we're trying to build.
Well, thank you, Larry, because I've thought of that in regard to my curriculum development, which was an applied curriculum, by actually going out and doing something meaningful, and learning from it, and actually providing a solution.
The students here could come and tell something to students there about actual practicums that they've already worked on here, and talk about some of the issues and problems of trying to be cast in this intermediary role between your university and a client group. You're in a course, but you're also trying to do something useful. They might be able to make a connection to a group of your students, talk about their experience, and that might get a group of your students interested in organizing a local practicum, even if the students from here don't work specifically on that project. But we have, over January, we have an intersession period where a group of students from here could travel, describe practicums, and maybe get some of your students to begin to think about doing something like that.
Okay, I've already been thinking about what we can do together, and sort of talked with Herman about the possibility if you can clear your February schedule and come out and meet myself and colleagues and some students. We have what we call Founders Week. I think you'd probably gain to learn more about our college because we have like public forums there. And even meeting some of our esteemed professors, and because I've always wanted the scientists to sit down with the Lakota Studies professors, because they have, I would call them very leading edge applications, research projects. But they need somebody to listen to them and interpret that into a project that has a deliverable that also exemplifies the disciplines of how you go through it. And I think you would find innovation in some of these things that we're talking about. One of them is we have many things regarding the authorities in our treaties that we have no way of actually getting a jump start in articulating and researching. And one of them is like, you know, underground water modeling, something like that, because that's one of a concern. But there's so many applications that we have that if you sat down and listened, you'd find them to be incredible as very innovative applications to approach and learn from. You know, some of these have never been attempted. Yeah, there's the treaty negotiation land claim ones that are very innovative. But beyond that, if you sat and listened to some of our elders, oh my God, I'd like to do that as a project, you know. But I'm only going to live to be not 100, I don't think, but I'd like to see a lot of those things ported over to our students to earn their PhDs on, you know.
Let me thank you again from all of us for traveling here and beginning a process of conversation that we hope will lead to some collaborative work. Students here have 2 o'clock classes that they're now late for, so we're going to